There lies the port, the vessel puffs her sail. There gloom the dark, broad seas, my mariners' souls, that have toiled and wrought, and thought with me, that ever with a frolic welcome took the thunder and the sunshine, and opposed free hearts, free foreheads. You and I are old. Old age hath yet his honor and his toil. Death closes all, but something ere to the end, some work of noble note may yet be done. Not unbecoming men that strove with the gods, lights begin to twinkle from the rocks. Long day wanes, the slow moon climbs, the deep moans with many voices. Come, my friends, 'tis not too late to seek a newer world. Push off, and sitting well in order smite the sounding furrows, for my purpose holds to sail beyond the sunset and the baths of all the western stars until I die. It may be that the gulfs will wash us down. It may be we shall touch the happy isles and see the great Achilles whom we knew. Though much is taken, much abides, and though we are not now, that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven, that which we are. One equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. Today I've got something that I think you guys will really like. I apologize for the leaves crunching under my feet here. But I've got something I think you'll really enjoy. It's something that I've really enjoyed the last week or so, reading. That poem that I read to you at the beginning of this video. It is a poem by Lord Tennyson. He was an English, he was a future poet laureate. He wrote this poem. And in it he's talking about Ulysses, you know, the hero of the Odyssey. In this poem he's talking about, I only read the last, I guess, 30 or so lines of the poem. But it's really a really beautiful poem, I think. And in it, Ulysses is lamenting how bored he is with governing his kingdom there in Ithaca after he had returned home. You know, he spent, 10 years in the Trojan War, 10 years afterwards in the Odyssey. He was gone for 20 years, but he returned home, returned to his throne. Yet he is lamenting this because he feels that he is growing stagnant in his old age. He feels that governing and, you know, he mentions earlier in the poem, laws unto a savage race. Hold on a second, let me take a seat here. Let me interject here quickly. I meant to say too that, you know, our people, we've built civilizations all across the world throughout history. And it's something that we excel at, but unfortunately, which is also mirrored, I think, in this poem, is this, you know, cyclical view of history. This, the ebb and flow of history, I guess you could say, in which we come out of the wild, we build these great civilizations, but over time, we become soft. You know, civilization softens us. And unfortunately today, I would imagine we are probably more soft than we've ever been. You know, that's one of the unfortunate things of, you know, building these civilizations. You know, like I said, it's just the ebb and flow of history. Found me a nice little seat here at the base of this tree. But anyway, like I was saying, the poem Ulysses, he is saying that he is tired and grown bored with governing, and that he wishes, even though he's old now and has traveled the world, he wishes to leave his son Telemachus the kingdom, and he wants to sail west so that hopefully he can meet the hero Achilles that he once knew. He's grown bored with governing. He thinks it's really just futile, it's stupid, and he's not interested in it. He feels that the people that he governed does not really know who he truly is, and he's burnt out, you could say. It's a very beautiful poem, like I said, and this poem was a personal favorite of Dr. William Luther Pierce's. And I think in some ways Pierce himself drew parallels from this poem to his own life. You see, here lately I've been reading up a bit on some of these men, these prominent figures in, I guess, what you would call American white nationalism. And I've always had a deep admiration for Dr. William Luther Pierce. Out of all the different figures, ranging from George Lincoln Rockwell to James Mason, Tom Metzger, a lot of these prominent writers, leaders you could say, while I admire all of them in their different ways, of course, you know, all of these men, Pierce included, were men with personal faults and personal failings. But I would say that Pierce, from me just listening to his some of his old radio conversations, his broadcasts from his compound there in Hillsboro, outside of Hillsboro, West Virginia, over time I've listened to some of his broadcasts, and I recently acquired a book called The Fame of a Dead Man's Deeds. But going back to these various figures, they've all had their contributions. But I find my beliefs and my thoughts are most congruent with Dr. Pierce's. His views on situations that our people encounter, the situation we are in, his thoughts on religion, and a variety of other things. I find my views to be most congruent with his. Now, this book, The Fame of a Dead Man's Deeds, was written, and it was written very well, by a more mainstream author. In fact, I actually acquired this book from a pretty popular website for ordering shit. I don't like giving the website any business, of course, but you can acquire it there. The guy's name was Robert S. Griffin, and he was what I would consider sort of similar to a man like A. James Gregor was. You know, A. James Gregor was an academic, a university professor, a writer. He took a very objective view towards National Socialism and fascism. You know, something very rare that we see, especially amongst, you know, mainline authors, academics, and such. Robert S. Griffin, basically, he stayed with William Pierce up there at the compound for, I think it was about 2 months in the summer of, I believe it was 98 or 1999. The book was published in 2001, a year before Pierce's death. And he stayed with Pierce for 2 months. And he got hours and hours of tape-recorded conversation. Pierce was weary at first, as he rightfully should have been, but Robert S. Griffin did a very good job. I mean, I'm a little over a quarter of the way through the book. He did an outstanding job basically painting a portrait of what made Dr. William Luther Pierce, what made him go. You see, going back to a lot of these other figures, I'm at the part of the book now where it's talking about when Pierce met up with and began to work with George Lincoln Rockwell back in the mid-60s. And Rockwell You know, I don't entirely agree with everything he said, but it is undeniable, I think, that the man suffered for what he did. I mean, he was eventually assassinated. He lost his family. His second wife, I think her name was Thora, took his children, moved back to Iceland, where she was originally from. He had a previous wife, too, that left him as well. And while I don't necessarily agree with Rockwell's view, per se, on Christianity, the man did a lot of other good things as well, absolutely. And I believe it's undeniable that he was truly committed to the cause. I mean, he gave up very much for it. And one thing I do have to give Rockwell is he was extremely charismatic. You know, I believe he was probably one of the most charismatic leaders to come out of this whole thing, you could say. But Pierce worked with him there for a few years. And likewise, if you know anything about James Mason, when James Mason was a young man, he also went to stay with Pierce for a while. A lot of these people are interconnected, and we can all learn things from them. And then, you know, you also have, see, like I said, Pierce's views are very congruent with mine. He never ever disavowed any sort of political violence. I mean, after all, look at his works of fiction, Turner Diaries and Hunter, you know, Oscar Yeager. He never disavowed political violence. In fact, the book Hunter is sort of a mixture of William Luther Pierce and a guy by the name of Paul Joseph Franklin, who was a serial killer, you could say, and that a lot of the actions that Oscar Yeager committed out of the book, Franklin was an inspiration for. But there's also parts of the book, too, where you can see that Pierce is also, in a way, talking about himself and his own life experience. But anyway, what I'm going to read to you is 18 pages. It's actually chapter 4 of that book. And I guess what I'll call this video is the early influences of Dr. Pierce. Some of the works that he had read before he came to these conclusions. And see, the poem about Ulysses, how it ties in with William Pierce's life. You see, William Pierce was extremely intelligent. He was a physics professor for a period of time at Oregon State University. And he achieved full professorship quite quickly. I think it was only a couple of years. You know, and I mean, he was a rising star, I guess you could say, in the academic field of physics. But when Pierce was in his undergraduate studies in college, he often wondered if what he was doing is what he wanted to do with his life. And, you know, many people do this, you know. We have to find our place in the world. And like I said earlier, he became a full professor within just a couple of years. He jumped up from associate professor, and he was well on his way to tenure. Like I said, he was a rising star, but he gave this all up because during this time, he started seeing what was going on in the world around him. He started to see just all the degeneracy of the 60s, the late 50s, 60s. He's seen, you know, the civil rights movement. He also seen the difference in how the media portrayed the Vietnam War compared to how it was during World War II. World War II, of course, everyone was behind the cause practically. The media, all these things, Hollywood. Fast forward, you know, 20 years or so to Vietnam, completely different. And he started looking into things. But yeah, like I said, I'm going to read you some of this. And one of the most important things I took from it, out of what I'm going to read you, is an interesting bit about self-mastery, self-discipline, self-control. You know, my friend Pat, he's the one, I talk to him ever so often. And that's how I came across this book. I asked him, you know, we were talking about this thing that we are all involved in. And I was saying, you know, I'd like to know more about some of these early figures, these earlier leaders, and how they would have operated before the internet came around. And then Pat showed me that get a hold of this book here. And I'm very grateful for him in showing it to me, and I quickly ordered it. It arrived. If I can remember to, I'll put a link in the box below. There's an audiobook version of this book from, I think, the White Alexandria Library Telegram channel. I will put a link to it in the box below. I have to thank my friend Amaria Arian for finding it yesterday. It's good work. And then I was talking to another friend of ours, Desiree, a while back, and we were talking about, how the internet could be, in a way, the ruination of us all. And, it's kind of counterproductive, counterintuitive, or whatever. I'm here on the internet speaking to you. But going back to self-mastery, self-discipline, that's one of the things I try to talk a lot about on this channel. I've had my struggles in life, and I overcame them. And we should always be working to improve ourselves. I think this internet stuff, like I've said before, might be the ruination of us all. I think if Pierce and some of these other guys were alive today, they would have mixed feelings about this sort of movement, I guess you could say. I think in a way they would be impressed with how much the internet has done to wake our people up, but I think they would also be shocked and somewhat horrified about it just governing people's lives. People talk about saving the white race, You're not going to save it online. Not one bit. You're not going to save it shit posting. You're not going to save it listening to podcasts. You're not going to save it listening to me. I'm not saving it by talking to you. Don't spend too much time online. Debates. People watch these large debate channels like Politically Provoked or Killstream, whatever. I've only watched 2 debates in the past year. The one with James Mason and Bob Larson. That was pretty funny. Pretty interesting. And then I watched my friend John Fashcroft debate some Indian leftist about a month ago or so on the Killstream, John's my friend. I wanted to see what was going on, It's pretty good. But I don't, get hyped up over this shit. I don't care for debates. There is a new debate channel called The Killing Fields, but I'm friends with those guys that run it, and they're trying to get themselves established. But by and large, I fear sometimes that a lot of us are prone to just consuming content and forgetting to live. Forgetting to work on themselves. And sometimes I feel guilty for this, to be honest, I don't know if I'm really helping anything by doing this. Here in the future, I'm probably going to cut back on the videos that I make, the number per month. Because I've got other things going on. As far as saving the white race goes, I'm of the opinion, too, that there's a not insignificant proportion of our people that just aren't worth saving. They're mentally damaged, mentally defective, too deeply indoctrinated, not worth saving. And these people, whenever things come to push and shove, some of the, like I said earlier about Pierce, and then we all know of Mason's works. These guys did not disavow political violence. And I'm not encouraging it, but I don't disavow it, not one bit. I don't think we're going to engage this system, this Semitic system, and come out victorious. We're not going to replicate what happened with a certain controversial regime in Western and Central Europe during the 1920s and 30s. We're not going to replicate that, because you can be damn sure that the people pulling the strings, they ain't going to allow that. They're going to be looking for it. But anyways, I've just eventually came to the position that sooner or later, things will come to push and shove. And we're not going to wake the masses up until things get bad enough. That's why acceleration is important. It's just a matter, I think, I don't know, I don't want to get off on this tangent. If you want to hear more, watch this video here. It's one of my better videos, I think. It's called Fatal Trajectory. And like I said, I'm not encouraging people to go out and do things. like what Robert J. Matthews or David Lane, men of action, men of direct action, men that can be admired. I'm not encouraging you to do such things, because there are other ways to fight. You can work on yourself. Hell, the men and women out there, those of you who have children, I throw up a Roman to you right now, because you are doing the work of providence. You know, I think we all have a part to play in this sort of situation. Now, is there anything else? This video, like I said, this video is going to be long. I apologize for this, but we're going to look at some of the early influences on Dr. Pierce and what made the man tick, what made the man go. So I'm going to go inside here and I'll read to you chapter 4 of this book. It's well worth reading, I believe. You know, and this is just a reminder, it's something I've harped on. You know, we all consume content, I produce it, but you know, we got to bear in mind that winning the battle, we ain't going to do it online. And you know, I have my few guys that I watch all of their stuff, but I keep in mind too, you know, there's a lot to be done in the real world. And there's a lot of ways to fight the system. We just have to think outside of the box. Perhaps get creative sometimes. Anyways, let's go read this. Also, one of the things that I forgot to mention about what draws me to Pierce is the fact that he was a Southerner. I believe his mother's family was from Alabama. And, of course, his father was killed only when William was 8 years old. Also the fact, too, that he had his National Alliance headquarters just up outside of Hillsborough, West Virginia. So, you know, I can kind of relate to that, you know. I mean, I live here in Appalachia. And that's one of the things that draws me to him. But anyways, what I was going to say is, let me find my place here. Here's the book that I was speaking about earlier, The Fame of a Dead Man's Deeds. You can see it has the life rune on it. I was going to read to you the entire 4th chapter, but I've decided against it. I tried to film it earlier, and I read for about 15 minutes. I'd only gotten through about 5 or 6 pages. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk a little bit about 3 works, I guess you could say, that had a real impact on William Luther Pierce when he was younger. Back when he discovered these, back when he was in college. The first one that I'm going to talk about is a George Bernard Shaw play. Now, George Bernard Shaw was an Irishman and a playwright. He wrote plays. And the play, it's mainly Act 3 of the play. The act is called Don Juan Goes to Hell. And see, let's see here. One of the things that helped me find direction was a play that I first came upon at Caltech back in 1955 or so. And it's called Man and Superman. That's the name of the entire play. But the main act, the 3rd act, is called Don Juan Goes to Hell. Act 3 of the play was what really struck me. It expressed the idea that a man shouldn't hold himself back. He should completely use himself up in the service to the life force. Life with a capital L. I bought a set of phonograph records that just had that act in it. Don Juan's expositions were what resonated with me. I listened to that set of records over and over to let it really sink in. You see, like I mentioned earlier, Man and Superman was written by the renowned conversationalist, critic, satirist, pundit, and playwright George Bernard Shaw. Like I said, he was born in Dublin in 1856 and died in 1950. And let's see. It's a very interesting play. It's worth reading. At least Act 3 is. Before Act 3, they have the prefatory remarks. Prefatory. And in it, it says, "This is the true joy in life, the being used for a purpose recognized by yourself as a mighty one. The being thoroughly worn out before you are thrown on the scrap heap. The being a force of nature instead of a feverish, selfish little clod of ailments and grievances, complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. And also the only real tragedy in life is being used by personally minded men for purposes you recognize to be base." You know, I take this as, you know, you expend yourself. You find something that you are passionate about and you pursue it fully. That's what you do. Be thoroughly spent and worn out. The idea of being worn out in the service of a mighty purpose was exactly what this bright young graduate student in California had been looking for. Now, in Act 3 of Man and Superman, like I said, it's called Don Juan Goes to Hell. There's 3 characters: Don Juan himself, his love interest. Well, let me rephrase this. What happens in Act 3 is the main characters of the play, which are Roebuck Ramsden. He's like an older character, older feller. He is the guardian of Anne Whitefield, which is the protagonist, a man by the name of Jack Tanner. That's his love interest. And what they do in Act 3 is they set off to go on a vacation to Spain. They're from London. They go to a vacation to a mountainous region in Spain. It doesn't say where. But when they arrive there, I guess they are traveling through the countryside, they are picked up. They're kidnapped by a gang of bandits, some brigands, you could say. And they are led by a character by the name of Mendoza. Very interestingly enough, in Act 3 here, Mendoza is described as a Spanish Jew. And Mendoza decides that he's going to ransom these 3 characters, Anne, Roebuck, and Jack. He's going to ransom them. So he basically, you know, they're being held at gunpoint, and Jack and them, they don't really put up much resistance, and they're like, well, it'll be tomorrow before we can receive any funds for your ransom, you know. And they go to sleep. They decide to bed down and go to sleep. And while they're asleep, Jack has a dream. And in this dream, he is Don Juan, and his love interest, Anne, is, I can't remember her name right off, her name's Anna in the act. And Roebuck, he's a talking statue. And see, Mendoza is the devil. That's why it's called Don Juan Goes to Hell. And they're having a dialogue. And in this debate between Don Juan and the devil, they're talking about heaven and earth and hell. And see, from Don Juan's perspective, hell is the current situation that man is living in, while heaven is where we can work and we can be real. There's no play pretending. Everywhere, the point he's trying to make is down here on earth, there's so much playing and pretending. But when in heaven, you can be the real thing. Let's see here. Let me look here. There's a couple other things I was going to read to you. Like I said, you know, in this act, the word life force with a capital L is this force that strives to attain a greater power of contemplating oneself, of greater power of self-actualization, self-realization. He refers to life's continual effort not only to maintain itself, but to achieve higher and higher organization and completer self-consciousness. Don Juan refers to the full achievement of these ends as attainment of Godhead. As Don Juan sees it, in all likelihood, Godhead won't come without a mighty struggle. life faces extremely formidable enemies, the forces of death and degeneration. You know, it goes back to what we've said too, you know, without a mighty struggle. Kind of ties into, at least from my perspective, to what you could call accelerationism. Now let's see. Where am I here? Well, life's central impulse is to move toward the creation of a superior kind of human being, Don Juan asserts. Don Juan is expressing an evolutionary Darwinian idea here, the concept of man evolving into something higher. But the life force, you know, it needs to be guided by the philosophical brain, according to this act. It needs a brain, this irresistible force, lest in its ignorance it should resist itself. And later on he states, to life, the force behind the man, intellect is a necessity, because without it, he, the life force, man, both blunders into death. Now let's see, I'm going to jump over here. And what is going to keep us from pursuing this ideal? This ideal of fulfilling your life's work, your self-actualization, your self-realization. What is going to he's asking what's going to keep you from pursuing this. According to Don Juan, it is our own lack of courage and preoccupation with respectability. Man gives every reason for his conduct save one, and that is cowardice, he asserts. All civilization is founded on his cowardice, on his abject tameness, which he calls his respectability. There is a way to overcome these personal limitations, however, and that is to find an idea worth giving one's life for. Or giving one's life to, excuse me. He says, men never really overcome fear until they imagine they are fighting to further a universal purpose. Fighting for an idea, Don Juan declares. That is why the idea of serving the life force is such a powerful one in his eyes. It enables people to live the life they would lead if they weren't so afraid and caught up in what others might think of them. It's a very interesting passage here, I believe. You know, he talks about cowardice. And you know, civilization, being tame, being civilized, you know, I mean, it leads to this. It leads to cowardice. You know, and it goes back to, if you wanted to wake up the masses, you know, we are too comfortable to do anything drastic. We haven't suffered enough. You know, like Didymus Sumidid has said in probably my favorite video of his, you know, suffering wasn't held to be anything necessarily bad. Yeah, suffering's rough, it's horrible. But it wasn't necessarily held to be bad in any sort of traditional society. Because suffering, it helps to make you stronger. It helps prepare you for doing great things. And we haven't suffered enough yet. We really haven't. And, you know, the road is going to be long. The road's going to be difficult. The road will be treacherous. And, you know, there's one thing I can guarantee. We all are going to suffer much more before we are able to do anything important. Anything, at least to wake up the masses, you know. A lot of us here, you know, we're already ahead of the curve. We know what's going on. But we, like for the masses to wake up, you can try to red pill the normies or whatever. Really, before the white masses ever get up off their ass and try to see things as they are, really, and it's sad to say, but when there's no food on the table, when there's no income, and when their children are hungry, that's when you'll see the white man truly wake up. And you know, it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that it is this way. Very unfortunate. Very, very much so. But as I see it, that's the only way. It's the only way. Let's see. The devil, after Don Juan had declared these things, the devil responds to Don Juan's assertions that by declaring that nature, which is the devil's term for the life force, in fact has no purpose. Well, let's see, what else should I mention here? Jump forward a little bit. Another thing that the devil says in this act is, I prefer to be my own master and not the tool of any blundering universal force, the devil informs Don Juan. I know that beauty is good to look at, that music is good to hear, that love is good to feel, and that they are all good to think about and talk about. As for your life force in the end, serving it will lead you to despair and decrepitude, of wastes and sacrifices, the waste and sacrifice of the power of enjoyment. In a word, the punishment of the fool who pursues the better before he has secured the good. And you know, the devil here, he isn't necessarily wrong. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of these prominent figures in American white nationalism, like Rockwell, Pierce, you know, all of them have been persecuted to some degree. Men of action like Robert J. Matthews and David Lane, Paul Joseph Franklin, they gave their lives for the cause. Franklin was executed in prison. Robert J. Matthews gunned down by federal agents, and David Lane, he died in prison, you know. Going back to what Rockwell lost his family, had to endure a lot. William Pierce, he also, you know, William Pierce, that's another thing that I admire about him. Like I was saying earlier, you know, he would have been a professor. He was a rising star, I guess you could say, in the academic community as far as physics goes. He could have had a cushy job, could have had a really comfy life, you could say. But he found this compelling reason, this insatiable drive to do something worthwhile, something thankless. Absolutely thankless, you know. He was vilified by the media, still vilified today. But he gave this up because he was pursuing his life's work. What he seen was a cause that was worth dying for. Now, also, Pierce, he modeled some of his concepts of his cosmotheism, basically from this play. I've not looked into cosmotheism very much here lately, but I do think it's quite interesting. In reply to, jumping back to the play here, in reply, Don Juan says, "But at least I won't be bored. So fare you well, Señor Satan." Don Juan then asks the statue to direct him to heaven. Remember, the statue was the character of the lady's guardian, Roebuck Ramsden. The statue replies that the frontier between heaven and hell is only the difference between two ways of looking at things. You know, I think that's very, some wisdom right there. Any road will take you across if you really want to get there. And off goes Don Juan. Anyway, yeah, this play really had a profound effect on young William back when he was an undergraduate in school. Let's see. Okay, you know, sometimes, I've mentioned this in other videos too, there's times that many of us, I'm sure, feel that we're born in the wrong time period. Myself, if I had to choose, I wish I would have been born, you know, pre-Christian Europe. Perhaps in the Nordic Bronze Age, or maybe the Viking Age. Or perhaps, you know, something more modern. I would have liked to have been a southwestern frontiersman here in Appalachia. Back in, you know, the 1700s, 1800s. But you know, it really doesn't do us any good to think of such things, you know, because we are born here, we are born now, we're alive now. And later on in this chapter, there's something that Pierce said here that I wanted to relate to you. In this part of the chapter, Pierce is telling Griffin, you know, about what led him down this path, what led him to get into this. And Pierce acknowledges right here that it was really just a matter of timing. You see, Pierce was a professor in, like, you know, the early 60s, and up at Oregon State. And he was starting to see a lot of things, you know, all through the early 60s to the mid-60s. He was a professor, and he's seen all the degeneration around him. He's seen the civil rights movement. He's seen Vietnam, and, you know, like how I mentioned earlier, how differently Vietnam was covered by the media compared to how it was in World War II. Like I said, everyone in World War II, when we were fighting our own kin over there in Europe, you know, Hollywood, the media, newspapers, the radio, all these things were all gung-ho, support the troops, you know, war bonds, collect rubber, collect oil, anything to help the war effort. But in Vietnam, it's completely different. We're fighting a bunch of Southeast Asians. And, you know, the Viet Cong flag is being flown at protests. Troops are called baby killers, all these things. But in here, Pierce was saying that I think it was just a matter of timing. If I had gone to Oregon State in 1955, if he would have been a professor there, when things were much more normal and stable, rather than in 1962 when I did, I probably would have stayed and become a full professor. If I had come earlier, I would have had graduate students working for me, and I would have had more connections on campus and been older and less adventurous. Maybe I would have deplored what was going on and would have talked it over with other people, but I probably would have stayed on the faculty. So, you know, that's why I was bringing up, you know, how a lot of us, you know, we wish we were born in a different time period, in a different era. We're here exactly when we're supposed to be. And, you know, modernity is just vile. It's disgusting. But we don't know what's around the corner. And that won't be revealed to us until we round that corner. You know, we are here when we are meant to be. I believe that wholeheartedly. Let's see. Let me skip a little bit here. Another one of the works that influenced Pierce to a degree, there's a lot of works, a lot of Oswald Spengler had an influence on him. I'm not going to get into more of the explicitly, a lot of the material that came from, you know, World War II and stuff. I'm not going to get into that in this video. I'm just looking at the early influences, like I said. Here Pierce says, I also read Brooks Adams at Oregon State. Brooks Adams is an interesting character. He was an author, a writer. He was an economist and historian. His grandfather, he was a member of the distinguished Adams family of presidents, you know, John Adams, John Quincy Adams. His grandfather was John Quincy Adams, actually. And something that Pierce mentions that really had an effect on him too is that in this book, The Law of Civilization and Decay, I'd like to read it here soon actually. In The Law of Civilization and Decay, Adams referred to one type, there's two types of men basically. Two basic types of individuals. One of them is the spiritual man, and the other is the economic man. Adams describes spiritual men as adventurous and idealistic. They are men of vision and daring. They have strong connection to their roots, to their heritage. Spiritual men are builders of civilization, says Adams. As examples of spiritual men, he lists farmers, warriors, and poets. Adams sees the English yeomanry, farmers, warriors in olden days, as epitomizing spiritual men. Sorry about that, I hope it's not too loud. Adams says that economic men come to the fore after a civilization is built. While the spirit of adventure and the current of idealism runs strong in spiritual men, economic men are materialists. They are typified by merchant and the bureaucrat. Peirce draws on Adam's categorizations to characterize economic men as the ones who know how to calculate the odds and evaluate an opportunity. They have cut themselves loose from their spiritual roots, and become cosmopolitans to the extent that offers them a personal and economic advantage. Peirce cites contemporary lawyers, businessmen, and politicians as examples of economic men. Since these early days at Oregon State, Peirce has been concerned by what he sees as the loss among European men of their spiritual and aesthetic sense, their warrior spirit, and their feeling for what is divine. You know, how many people do you meet like this out in life? Back when I was in college, there was a lot of economic men, you could say. After all, I went for a degree in finance, of course. If I would have pursued such a field, I would have been an economic man. I don't want to be an economic man. We don't need economic men. We need spiritual men. It's like the title of one of Apollonian Germ's videos. We don't need politicians, we need pioneers. We need to rediscover ourselves. You know, it's just, once again, you know, civilization. Like I said earlier, our people are excellent at conquering and taming and building great civilizations. But once confined to those civilizations, it is inevitable that we decline. Let's see here. As he did with reference to Adam's concept, economic men, Peirce often uses the word cosmopolitan and cosmopolitanism to describe what has become of European Americans, and obviously he doesn't like it. In one of our talks, I asked him to define the term cosmopolitan, and he answered, basically, cosmopolitan, at least as I use it, he replied, is a synonym for multicultural. I date the word cosmopolitan back to the 1930s when the magazine by that name was launched. You know, Cosmo, I guess. Or at least I think it was in the 30s. Anyway, in that context, cosmopolitan was used to refer to someone who was urbane, sophisticated, familiar with many things, not narrow and parochial at all. In that day, it didn't have the connotation I and others bring to it now, which is someone who is deracinated, devoid of race, and rootless. When I use it, I think of whites in some place like New York City or Washington, D.C. So when you talk about cosmopolitan, you're not so much getting at the idea of someone who is with it, which is the way I think of it. No, for me, cosmopolitan has a different meaning from that. To me, it means no longer really white, no longer really Western. It is a blended sort of person. I guess that is how I would put it. Also, let me get a drink of water here. The third work that had such a profound influence on young William was Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra. And actually, I have to admit, I haven't read it. You know, I'm not really particularly well read in a lot of these things, in a lot of philosophy, I guess you could say. I did have my friend, another one of my friends, B1, recommend it to me, and hopefully here in the future I will get it read. But you know, like I've said before previously, right now I'm reading 5 different books, trying to get some things done. During the winter, I'm able to read a lot, but you know, during the spring, summer, and fall, it's a little harder to squeeze in. But anyway, there are 3 ideas. You know, he gives a little summary here of Thus Spoke Zarathustra. And there's 3 ideas, and all of these ideas are things that I've thought of previously. You know, things that are just true wisdom, in my opinion. So I need to read this book, I guess you could say. 3 ideas that Nietzsche formulated bear mention in this context: the will to power, the concept of the Overman or Superman, you know, kind of ties into the play I was reading from earlier, and the contrast between what Nietzsche called a slave morality and a master morality. By will to power, Nietzsche meant the urge to dominate or master. He saw this urge as being a primary force in all of life, including man. The will to power, according to Nietzsche, explains the human tendency to press forward, often in the face of great strain, tension, and pain, and even the prospect of death, to accomplish tasks that allow one to feel powerful, capable, and strong. It's completely admirable. This is something that we long for, and it's something that the modern man, really doesn't have a way to express or use nowadays. Some have misinterpreted Nietzsche as equating the will to power with domination and mastery over other people. Much more, Nietzsche was talking about power over one's self. He wasn't really interested, per se, in political or economic power. What he most cared about was self-mastery and self-overcoming, becoming better than one is now. Nietzsche saw the will to power as the force that gives a unique value to human life. He thought that mankind could use this force consciously to become the embodiment of the vision of a higher form of man that he articulated. He imagined human beings mastering their own energies and channeling them so as to serve the process of transforming themselves into beings of boundless passion, fierce joy, and creative might. These creatures would be the overmen or supermen. They would embody our glorious destiny. But there is one major obstacle in the way of achieving the Superman that Nietzsche perceived, and it takes the form of a set of moral values, that is to say, concepts of right and wrong. Nietzsche called that set of moral values that stood in the way of the development of the Superman the slave morality. He contended that the slave morality is the product of fear and resentment of the strong and accomplished by the weak and less able. He accused the Christian church of articulating and legitimizing the resentment of the common people against the masterful people in order to gain power for itself. You can see that certainly being the case. Now, the church encourages lesser people to define their own weakness as good and the aggressive strength and mastery of their betters as bad, said Nietzsche. According to the slave morality, pride and ferocity are bad, and meekness and humility are good, and tough-mindedness is bad, and sentimentality is good. The slave morality condemns self-assertion as arrogance, perverts the body and sexuality with shame, and undercuts earthly life by extolling an illusionary afterlife. Nietzsche saw the slave morality as essentially a denial of life. Nietzsche called for a master morality which will affirm life pursued with zeal, promote self-transcendence, and eliminate a preoccupation with guilt. Nietzsche implored man to remain faithful to this earth. Instead of constructing an ideal above the clouds that only underscores human inferiority, he wanted us to conceive of a higher type of humanity and exert ourselves to realize it. But in order to embark on this adventure, he contended, we have to expunge the morality that keeps us enslaved. The Supermans and the means of creating this being must become the standard of value, said Nietzsche. So yeah, going back to the morality thing, I've heard some people in our spheres, they say that we should, I guess you should say, fight with honor, fight with honesty. Although I think, our enemies do not use these things, not in the least. Our enemies are extremely deceptive, and they are extremely cunning to a degree, at least some of them, I've heard some people say, and that goes back to what I was saying earlier about thinking outside of the box. Some of these more prominent formal groups, I guess you could say, nowadays, I think they're really constrained by how they try to raise funds for their operations, to fund their mission. I have a friend, and, a couple years ago, a couple years ago now, almost a couple of years ago, when all the BLM, the race riots, all that bullshit, the summer of love in 2020. During this time, my friend had a really good idea. And he made some money doing this. And it was cunning, and it was deceptive. But it was smart. You know what he did is he went, I guess he has access to a way to print t-shirts. And he went, got a bunch of t-shirts, and was able to print, you know, the BLM logo, you know, with these different slogans. Printed out a bunch of t-shirts, many of them. And he sold them to white liberals, to white leftists. And you know, on the surface, I mean, you know, that's kind of a hard thing to do, you know. But I mean, this was money for him to live on, you know, to do things with. And it's extremely intelligent. Why do these groups want to take membership dues? Which, I mean, I understand. I guess they have to do that, you know, to have some sort of income. But they got to think outside the box. Why not print up a bunch of, you know, social justice t-shirts and sell them to, you know, the idiots of our own race? Who cares if we're taking their money? I'd rather take their money than rob my guys. Absolutely. Think outside the box. And you know another thing about selling t-shirts like this? It's a good way to identify your enemies. You know, if things ever come to push and shove and you see some white guy with a BLM t-shirt, that's your enemy. You know, that's one of these things, you know, I don't think our enemies deserve any honesty. They don't deserve any quarter. They deserve no respect. They deserve nothing. Except for retribution. That's the only thing they deserve. Nothing else. Don't be honest with them. None of that. Anyways, just wanted to throw that in there. You know, that's just, as I see it, an example of our own morality and honor. You know, unfortunately, white altruism is one of our biggest problems. It really is, you know. You know, these leftists and all these types, they blame us for slavery and all these things. They never once mention Civil War here in the United States. Who did all the fighting? The poor white farmers, the peasants, to end it, you know. They never mention that, of course. So you see, our enemies, they don't deserve any one iota of honesty from us. And like I said, you know, if you can rip people off, you know, we're going to have to, you know, as I see it, whenever things, in the time leading up to when things come to being, you know, push and shove, we're going to have to play dirty. We're going to have to deal with this. These enemies don't deserve honor. You know, if they were a worthy adversary, one of our own, I can understand honor then. But we don't live in honorable times, you know. Is there anything else here? This video is incredibly long. I apologize. And these are 3 works that had a very huge influence on the young Dr. Pierce. And as this chapter closes, it reads the poem, Ulysses, that I read at the beginning of this chapter. And I'll just read the finish here. When Pierce finished reciting the Tennyson poem, he carefully returned the book to its place on the bookshelf and sat down again, and we looked at each other silently for a time. So all these things had a very important effect on the young Dr. Pierce. Like I said, I'm not even finished with this book. I am probably about a third of the way through it. Well worth reading, and like I said, I will try to remember to put the link to the audiobook in the box below. You know, and there's something else. Oh, there was just something else. Damn it. Sorry. Yes, going back to what Nietzsche was talking about. Sorry, I had to jump around a bit here. I almost forgot this, and this was one of the most important points that I wanted to make, that I wanted to emphasize. I've spoke on it a bit before. What kind of qualities are at the top of the scale as you see it? These are talking about the qualities of the overman that Nietzsche posits in his work. And like I said, Griffin asks him, what kind of qualities will this overman have? And Pierce answered, wisdom is one. Wisdom grounded in objectivity, the ability to see the world as it really is. And then there's courage, not being fearful or cowardly. Self-mastery is one. Self-mastery. In fact, this is probably the most valuable trait a person can have. And willpower, the ability to use fully all of the talents and strengths that you have and not succumbing to weaknesses, and being able to stick to a task once you've made the decision to do something, putting everything else aside and focusing your ability and energy on accomplishing that task. Those are some that I put at the top of the list. Like I said, some of the things I talk about on this channel is mastering yourself. And you know, some people may criticize me and say that that goes against, you know, collectivization. It's too individualistic. My response to that would be that individualism and collectivism is a false dichotomy, at least in my eyes. Because any strong collective is made up of strong individuals. These individuals may have different talents, different skills. And it helps, of course, if each individual, you know, they know their place in whatever group or whatever collective, if they know their place. But a strong collective is made up of strong individuals. And that's one of the things I talk about here a lot, is improving yourself. You know, in the world, we really don't have a lot of power over things. Our power, our people's power, has been sorely diminished over the decades. And, you know, it's really hard to know where to start. It really is, you know. This is a really daunting task that we have. The enemy is, it's like a hydra. So many heads. Even if you manage to lop one head off, there's going to be another one spring up shortly thereafter. It's really hard to know where to start. And you know, in life, people like us, you know, we don't control a lot of things. Like I said earlier, a second ago, our people's power has been diminished institutionally, politically, all these things. And one thing, though, that we can take a bit of solace in is that we do have power over one single thing. That one thing is ourselves. And although one individual, one person, certainly isn't a lot in the sea of humanity that we live in today, but it can be a very powerful thing. A man can get his message out and change millions. So that is one thing to draw comfort from, in a way, is to realize that although we may not have power, we have a lot of power. We have power over ourselves. It's just some food for thought. Sorry this video's been so long. Thank y'all for watching. Bye-bye.